And you see, that's not legal. Henry Kissinger has no legal right to be directing. He didn't say advising. He said we get our daily marching orders. That means we're getting orders from someone outside of government. That is proof of a conspiracy.
And why are they so open? Because they believe setting a precedent. They openly talk about what they're doing. It's like, oh, we're going to put lithium in your water now in the New York Times to make you feel better. They just take the power of us exposing it away from us by just admitting it.
Well, you know, I'm surprised, frankly, that that's still up on the website of the CFR, the speech of the Munich Security Conference, because it's right there, the kind of evidence that we need. I've been able to convince a lot of skeptics about the powerful conspiracies that involved at the highest level of government through that quote, and they haven't taken it out. I think they're frankly confident enough now in their manipulated powers that they aren't afraid of us anymore. Now, that said, still, they don't have absolute control. I think they have effective control, but they still have to manipulate the public through the media. They still have to seed the Internet with false conspiracy theories so as to denigrate all conspiracy theories. That's why they have to attack you, as the way they've been doing with the agent provocateurs putting the graffiti on the wall. They're still worried about us, but I think they're pretty confident.
Unfortunately, I agree with you, but more than confidence, they're committed. They can't pull out of this. They passed the point of no return a long time ago. Let's continue with your global projection into the future and spend time on their domestic suppression system they're openly now building. We'll be right back. WorldAffairsBrief.com's the website of our guest, Joel Skousen. He's been fighting the globalists for decades and his family for more than 50-plus years. The website where you can check out our information is Infowars.com and, of course, PrisonPlanet.tv, where we simulcast the radio show in full living color with videos. We can add another level of documentation here. Let's finish up, Joel, with where you see the globalists going and what their master endgame is. If they are able to successfully pull this off, what our world is going to look like. Joel Skousen.
Well, let me go back, first of all, to what I consider a very neat piece of disinformation that got into my uncle's book, The Naked Capitalist. He was the first one to publish the famous Rowan Gaither quote, where he was talking to Norman Dodd about admitting that the purpose of the Ford Foundation and other foundations was to seamlessly join the United States and the Soviet Union. In fact, a true conspirator like Rowan Gaither never would have told the truth to a legitimate conservative like Norman Dodd trying to investigate what's going on. What he said had to be a lie. But it made it believable. He had to give some excuse because it was very obvious to the conservatives, that my uncle noted this in The Naked Communist, that the capitalists, the people in government, were continuing to fund communism. They brought Mao to power. They paved the way for the Sandinistas in Nicaragua and ousted Batista to get Fidel Castro on. So either they were communists, or in fact they were using the communists for something. And the Rowan Gaither quote kind of tends to give a feeling like, well, there was a benevolent reason for all of this assisting communism. That's so that we can blend these two societies in.
Well, 7277 State Department document basically says that.
Well, here's what I think is really happening. First of all, I think that Russia and China are legitimate predator competitors for world government control. These are not being controlled directly by the Anglo-American establishment.
I agree. It's like the British creating Hitler.
That's right. He was not their puppet. They were, in fact, facilitating him because of the dialectic, because they wanted to have war. War would give them the excuse to create world government.
Well, that's like funding the radical Muslims for 50 years.
Exactly. It's like funding the environmentalists when they want to shut down domestic oil production. And that's exactly what they're doing. So they play this dialectic. We have to be very careful of absorbing disinformation like that, which gives plausible reasons for things which are not truly the real reason behind it. So here's what I think is going to happen. You have three separate predators. China, predator centers. China, Russia, and the Anglo-American establishment, or what I call the globalists. Now, they're intending to destroy one another. Right now, China and Russia are in a semi-quasi-alliance because they want to take down the West. And the globalists in the West, in fact, have been facilitating the rise of communism, not only to break down other governments so they can ride in as a rescuer and save countries from the evils of communism with their semi-socialist position, slightly better but still controlling. But more than that, they are facilitating and hiding and covering up for especially Russian military dominance, Russian rearmament. They're exposing a little bit, but always downplaying it in their annual report about the Chinese military threat. But you notice, Alex, there is no Pentagon report on the Russian military threat any year at all. And Russia is far in advance of Red China in terms of its stockpile of nuclear weapons, underground bunker systems in the Yamato Mountain area, and biological and chemical weapons, clearly preparing to not only win, but continue to produce nuclear weapons after the beginning of a nuclear war. And the government's covering for it. Nothing's more telling of that in the 1997 story, front page New York Times, about the bunker city under Yamato Mountain, and the CIA says, we're not worried, it's defensive. Well, how did they know it was defensive? They'd never been in it. They were covering for it. They've never been in it to this day, and yet they still say that Russia is in compliance with all treaties. Absolute lies. So why are they? Are they communists? No, they're not communists. Was Alger Hiss a communist? Yes, he joined the party, but I believe Alger Hiss was a globalist who had gone into the Communist Party to help facilitate their integration within the state, but to also manipulate.
Well, that's like the Rockefellers and Arm & Hammer giving them the industrial funding after World War II and right into Vietnam. I mean, they have to create the crises so they have an excuse to tax and build up their infrastructure, which isn't just pointed outward, it's also pointed inward.
That's correct. So I think what's going to happen is the globalists want a third world war, Russia and China attacking the West. China will take up the Far East. I think they'll occupy clear down to Australia and New Zealand. But at some point during the war, it's my theory that, by the way, our own leaders come out of their deep underground bunkers, and they're not building those for terrorist attack. They're building those because they know there's 6 new bunkers being built. They know there's a nuclear war coming.
Joel, let's talk about underground bases, because in the 50s they admitted a lot of this, and they've built huge complexes. And I've got some cousins and family from Fort Hood and other areas in Central Texas, and they say, yeah, they're down there. Railways, everything. Let's talk about continuity of government and their takeover on the other side. His World Affairs Brief really is excellent analysis from a very well-informed perspective, and people can get a trial copy of it by emailing the editor, or they can go to the site and subscribe. Tell folks how they do that, Joel.
Well, the site is www.worldaffairsbrief.com. It gives a synopsis of the current brief and tells you how you can get a free sample copy. Just email me at editor@worldaffairsbrief.com. There's just a modest subscription price for the weekly World Affairs Brief, where I give my in-depth analysis of the news, trying to put back, as Alex does, the stuff that the media purposely leaves out.
Separately, you raised this before we get into the big picture again and their domestic control system and how we combat that, taking back the states and local governments. You talked about disinformation campaigns. You talked about how they try to put out, unbelievable garbage. And even if you try to be accurate, sometimes, you fall for it. None of us are perfect. But clearly, and Cass Sunstein admits this, and we have other documents where the government admits they're doing it, but the White House regulations are, says they're on the web posing as patriots, posing as conservatives, posing as conspiracy theorists to be outlandish. And he said the government and mainstream media have no credibility. We've read these quotes, even been in the Associated Press. He said they also create infighting, classic COINTELPRO that was used in this country, and I see them just pulling out all the stops on it right now, really trying to get us to fight with each other. And anybody you see on the web, in my experience, who spends even 30% of their time or more infighting or calling for violence, it comes out like Hal Turner, they're feds.
Absolutely. Hal Turner, of course, is a classic example of somebody who really tried to instigate infighting and tension within the web. I think it's very important for us to be very, very careful, especially about the doomsday scenarios. Now, I am ultimately pessimistic about things. At least I'm hedging my bets. I feel like even though there's still a chance that we can overturn this, we can only do so if we expose enough of the actual conspiracy facts and theories that are there. And since conspiracy is anathema to the mainstream media and to almost everyone has been cautioned to think, oh, you can't accept conspiracy. I mean, they are predisposing the people to reject the very evidence that can blow this thing wide open. But with all that, whether or not we can do it or whether or not we can't win, the point is we always ought to be prepared for a takedown. it would be unwise to be going forward with blind optimism and not understand the warning I'm giving about this Third World War nuclear war that's being. I mean, there's got to be some reason why the government is protecting the Russia in their preparation for war.
Well, let's talk about what you were getting into with the underground bases. I mean, I've had national TV shows here interviewing me saying, Mr. Jones, you say there's underground bases. Well, in Switzerland, they're public with 2 years' supply of food and weapons for their entire population. Our government has spent more, from the evidence I've seen, correct me because you're an expert in this specific area, than other governments like Russia and China. But those aren't for the American people. They're for the elite, and they admit it's part of this continuity of government program, which they can also use as their pretext to take over.
Now, there's also another element to the underground bases that's occurring. There are a lot of secret projects that are going on in development in Area 51 and other underground secret bases. And there are bunker systems, there's underground factory bases. They're basically doing what the Russians are also doing. They're covering for the Russians, and they're covering for their efforts. The reason is they do not intend to use these new high-tech weapons to defend America. They intend, as PDD 60 outlined during the Clinton administration, to have America absorb a nuclear first strike. Then they can come out of their bunkers and say, oh, the Russians deceived us. We didn't know that they were preparing, just like they claim they didn't know about 9/11. They do know, and they, in fact, are inducing, trying to bend over backwards to appear and to disarm, to induce the Russians to strike, because this strike is essential for bringing America to its knees militarily, at least the appearance that it's on its knees militarily, at least in terms of the public military. That's why I wouldn't have my boys in the military when this strike occurs. They're going to get nuked. And then our government's going to allow it to happen. They're going to come out of their bunkers and say, we're innocent, we didn't know, the Russians deceived us, but now we have no choice but to give military power, to rebuild, give military power to a world army to prosecute this great new patriotic war. And then we'll start to see these secret high-tech weapons come out of the underground bases. It'll be after the fact, after we've lost our liberty, after we've been talked into giving our sovereignty.
I agree totally. They need these catastrophes because if you read their deeper writings that are all published, it goes back to the French Revolution and the Jacobins and the Illuminati. They wanted a 10-day-a-week week. They wanted to end the family. I mean, everything we see in communism and eugenics and socialism and collectivism really drew on older ideas, but came into a type of coalescence during the French Revolution, and that's their model. They want a giant kill-off. They're obsessed with how the Black Plague killed upwards of half of Europe and how it supposedly caused a renaissance. Do you concur with what I just said?
Yeah, there's every evidence that they are going to use war, and the biological and chemical weapons will be unleashed during that thing as to kill off a large portion of the population. There's also one other interesting portion of my general theory which I want to air. That is, it's my belief, I'm probably the only analyst out there that claims this, but I believe that China is going to betray Russia during the prosecution of this Third World War, creating a two-front war against Russia. Russia will be eliminated as one of the predators during that. And the interesting thing is that the globalists want that, because then if they've got China as a new Cold War enemy, after we've built up their military and given them all that they need to help prosecute the war with
They'll
Russia,
have a new false bipolar system.
That's right. Then they can say, oh, we've got to keep this international military force active and powerful because we've got a new enemy, China.
Well, wait. I mean, I actually agree with you that Sino-Chinese split, Russian-Chinese split is real, because it's come out that those deals were actually made in '49 to put Mao in. And then that was just the publication of what was happening with Nixon in the early 70s of opening it up. And now it's been declassified that in the 60s, Russia requested the U.S. Either aid or stand back during a Russian nuke attack on China, and the United States threatened to nuke them if they did that.
Yeah, I've heard that too. I've not been able to prove that.
Well, it's Times of London. I'd heard it too, but it was reportedly declassified by the Chinese and in partial declassification 2 months ago in the United States.
Now, lastly, I want to make sure that our listeners understand that most of the disinformation on the net to whip up hysteria and to get us discredited has to do with imminent martial law and imminent economic collapse. There's two reasons why I don't believe that's going to happen.